It was the dead of night when I first noticed something was wrong in Roswell. The town had always felt a little off, but I never thought much of it. I mean, it's a small town. Most people know each other by name, and if you're lucky, you don't get stuck in the endless loop of gossip. But that night was different. I'm Jake, a 32-year-old mechanic who grew up in this town. There's not much to it. A couple of diners, an old general store, a rundown church with a bell that hadn't rung in years, and a few decaying houses that most people just left behind. I had always found comfort in the familiarity of it, but as I walked back from the bar after grabbing a beer, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something was watching me. The air felt too still, unnaturally still, like the whole town was holding its breath. I passed by the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The moonlight barely cut through the thick trees surrounding it, casting shadows that seemed to shift unnaturally. That's when I heard it. The sound, like a low hum, almost like the earth was vibrating beneath my feet. I stopped, looked around, no one in sight, and then I saw her, a woman standing by one of the graves. She was pale, almost ghostly in the moonlight, wearing what looked like a white dress. Too clean for this town. Her hair was black, cascading down her back like a shadow, and she was staring directly at me. I should have kept walking. I should have turned around and never looked back. But something about her, about the way she was just standing there, unmoving, it was like she was waiting for me. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice shaky. I don't know why I said that. There was no reason for me to speak to her. She didn't respond, but her head tilted slightly, and I swear I heard the faintest whisper on the wind, something I couldn't make out. I took a step forward, and another, and that's when I saw it. The grave she was standing by. My own name. The stones were worn, almost illegible, but I could just make out the letters carved into the weathered marble. Jake Matthews, 1989 to 2024. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. That couldn't be real. That was impossible. I looked back at the woman, but she was gone. Disappeared into the trees like she'd never been there. And that's when I started running. I ran all the way back to my house, heart hammering, my breath coming out in sharp gasps. I slammed the door shut behind me, locked it, and stumbled into the kitchen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was I hallucinating? Had I drunk too much? But the grave, the name, it felt so real. I couldn't shake the image of that woman. She wasn't just some wandering spirit. There was something in her eyes, something that said she had been waiting for me. I called my brother Ben. He's the kind of guy who laughs at everything, even when it's not funny. He never took much stock in the supernatural, so maybe I was hoping he could talk some sense into me. "Ben, something's wrong," I said, my voice trembling. I saw something by the cemetery, a woman, and my name on a gravestone. "Jake, you've been working too hard, man. It's late." "You've been drinking," he said, his voice tired but dismissive. I wasn't convinced. I knew what I had seen. There was no way I could have imagined it. But as I sat there, trying to gather my thoughts, something odd happened. A knock at the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was slow, deliberate 3 knocks, then a pause, followed by 2 more. I felt my blood run cold. That was the pattern my grandfather always used when he visited. But he had died years ago. I stood frozen, staring at the door. The knock came again, louder this time. "Jake," a voice called softly from the other side. "Jake, it's time." I didn't recognize the voice, but it had that same eerie, unsettling quality. The same voice I had heard just outside the cemetery. I backed away from the door, panic creeping up my spine. I wasn't sure what I was more afraid of, what was outside, or the fact that the voice seemed to know my name. Then, as if on cue, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and the only sound was the wind howling outside, scraping against the windows like a clawing hand. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the switch. The light flickered and barely illuminated the room, but it was enough to make me notice something that made my stomach turn. The door. It was slowly creaking open. I didn't remember unlocking it. I froze, the flashlight casting long shadows against the walls as I strained to hear any sound. I took one step toward the door, And that's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the hallway, shrouded in the darkness. I couldn't make out any features, but the shape was unmistakable. A person, or something that resembled a person, staring directly at me. The air around me grew colder, like a chill had wrapped itself around my bones. Then I heard it again, soft, almost a whisper. "Jake, it's time." I didn't wait for another word. I bolted out of the house, running into the night, not caring where I went. My only instinct was to get away from whatever was inside that house. Whatever had been watching me. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was I had to get as far away from my house as possible. My feet pounded against the cracked asphalt, my heart still racing, and the cold air cut through me like a blade. But no matter how far I ran, it felt like something was always just behind me, like I was being followed. I finally reached the old diner on the edge of town, the one that had been closed for years. The neon lights above the sign flickered weakly, and the windows were covered in a thick layer of grime. But it was better than being out there, alone in the dark. I forced open the rusty door and stumbled inside, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The place was silent, too silent. There was dust in the air, the smell of old coffee still lingering, but no sign of anyone around. I glanced nervously around, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And then I saw it. On the counter, the old radio, one of those metal, clunky ones that hadn't worked in years. It was on, static crackling from the speakers. I could barely make out a voice, distorted and faint, but there was something familiar about it. Jake, it's time." The words sent a jolt of fear straight through me. I turned away from the radio, my mind racing, but that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway. I didn't recognize the face, but there was something about the eyes. Something empty, hollow, like a void staring straight into me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't say a word. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of lead. It was like something invisible was holding me in place, trapping me there. Then, slowly, the figure stepped forward, the sound of its footsteps echoing in the silence. It wasn't until it was almost right in front of me that I saw the details. The skin, pale and sickly, stretched too tightly across the bones. The clothes old, tattered, like they hadn't been touched in years. But the worst part was the smile. It wasn't a smile. It was a grotesque, twisted thing, like it was trying to mock what a smile should be. The skin around the mouth pulled back too far, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many. It spoke, its voice low and guttural. "You thought you could escape, Jake. You thought running would save you, but you're already here." The air around me grew thick, suffocating, and that's when I realized this wasn't a person. This was something else, something older, something that had been waiting for me, maybe even longer than I had been alive. The figure raised its hand, and I felt my chest tighten. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching across the walls, pulling me toward them. I was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to scream. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The figure melted into the shadows, leaving only an unbearable silence in its wake. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind was unraveling, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to make it out of Roswell alive. The town had a secret, and it was waiting for me to figure it out. I couldn't go back to my house. I couldn't go anywhere. It was like the entire town had turned against me, like I was marked. My heart raced in my chest, but my feet felt heavy, like I was walking through sand. The fear, it wrapped itself around me like an iron chain, and no matter where I turned, I felt its weight pulling me down. I stumbled out of the diner and onto the empty streets of Roswell, my mind reeling. The figure, the voice, that thing. It was clear now that I wasn't just seeing things. Something dark, something ancient, had a hold on this place. I found myself walking towards the cemetery again, against my better judgment. I didn't know why I was heading back there, but I felt a pull, like the answers I needed were buried beneath those cold stones. The air was colder now, and the moon hung low, casting a sickly glow across the graves. As I walked past the old mausoleum at the far corner of the cemetery, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A cracked, weathered stone at the base of the building. It was almost hidden, buried beneath ivy and moss, but something about it caught my eye. I crouched down, brushing the foliage aside, and saw the name etched into the stone. Roswell. I froze. This wasn't just some random grave. This was the town's name. A grave that belonged to a town? That couldn't be right. Suddenly, I felt it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew, without a doubt, I wasn't alone. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the cemetery, reverberating off the tombstones. It was deep, unnatural, like it didn't come from any living thing. It sounded like something ancient, something that had been lying in wait for years, just beneath the surface of the earth. I turned around, but there was nothing, just the shadows of the graves stretching long and dark in the moonlight. "Jake," a voice whispered, the same voice that had been calling me for days. "You don't get to leave." I spun in every direction, trying to find the source, but there was nothing, just that same suffocating silence. The earth seemed to breathe with me, and with every breath, the pressure in my chest grew heavier. That's when I heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable, footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps crunching against the gravel. I wasn't alone. I backed away, my legs weak, my breath ragged, but I couldn't stop myself from walking toward the source of the sound. There was a part of me that knew, deep down, I had to confront whatever was haunting this place. That's when I saw her again. The woman. The one who had been standing by the grave with my name. She was at the edge of the cemetery, standing between the gravestones, her white dress almost glowing in the moonlight. Her black hair hung in front of her face, and I could see the outline of her figure, but I couldn't make out any more details. She wasn't moving, just watching me. "You're too late, Jake," she said, her voice hollow and empty, like it came from far, far away. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that I thought it might burst. "You've been chosen," she continued, stepping closer. "The town is ours. You're part of it now, forever." Her voice was sweet, almost like a lullaby, but the words, they were suffocating, trapping me in place. I wanted to run. I should have run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the earth itself had a grip on me, holding me in place. The ground beneath me felt wrong. I was about to scream when the ground shook violently, a deep rumble shaking the very air. A massive crack split the ground open in front of me, sending a cloud of dust into the air. I stumbled back, eyes wide with terror, as I saw something rise from the depths. A dark figure, a shape that had been buried for far too long. It was the town, or at least what was left of it. It wasn't alive, not in any real sense. It was something much worse. The earth had given it up, and now it was coming for me. The ground trembled beneath my feet as the dark figure rose from the earth. The air around me thickened, and I could taste the decay, the rot, the centuries-old secrets that had been buried beneath Roswell. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My body was locked in place, my every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The figure rose higher, its shape twisting, its body made of shadow and something darker, something ancient. It wasn't human. Whatever it was beyond comprehension, a nightmare taking form right in front of my eyes. I stumbled back, but my legs gave way, and I fell hard to the ground. I could feel the cold earth beneath me, and it was as if the ground itself was trying to pull me into its depths. The figure loomed over me now, its presence suffocating. It didn't speak, but I could feel its thoughts pressing against my mind, like it was speaking directly to me, without words. "You are ours, Jake. You always have been." The voice wasn't coming from the figure. It wasn't coming from anywhere at all. It was inside my head. The same voice, cold and empty, that had been calling to me for days, echoing through my thoughts. I couldn't escape it. The woman, the one in the white dress, stepped closer, her eyes glowing now, like they were filled with light that burned my soul. The town is part of it. You were born to serve it. You don't get to leave, Jake. No one does. I wanted to fight it. I wanted to scream, to push myself up and run, but I knew it was useless. I was trapped. That's when I remembered something. Something my grandfather had told me when I was a kid. Something I had brushed off as a crazy story. He used to talk about the old rituals, the ones the town's founders had performed to ensure that Roswell never truly died. To keep it alive, they had to feed it. And they did. Every generation, every cycle, they had to offer someone. A sacrifice. I was the sacrifice. I had always been meant to be. But there was something inside me, a small flicker of resistance. My grandfather had also told me something else. If you ever find yourself at the crossroads, if you ever feel the town's grip tightening, you can break the chain. You just have to choose. I didn't know what that meant. Didn't understand it until now. A part of me wanted to give in, to accept it. It would be easy. I was already caught, already here. But there was another part, the part that screamed at me to survive, to fight. I wasn't going to be just another part of Roswell's curse. I wasn't going to be its prisoner. The ground beneath me began to shake again, and I felt it. An undeniable pull, the weight of the town's darkness, trying to drag me in. I had to choose. My hands trembled as I reached into my pocket, feeling the cold metal of my grandfather's old pocket watch, the same one he had always carried, the same one that had survived everything. I gripped it tightly, squeezing my eyes shut, and whispered the words he had taught me all those years ago. Not today. In that moment, I felt a surge of power. The air shifted. The ground beneath me seemed to rumble with a new energy, something that fought back against the town's darkness. The figure, the thing that had been feeding on Roswell, reared back as if it had been struck, its form flickering, destabilizing. The woman screamed, her voice twisting into something animalistic as she reached for me. But it was too late. The town's curse broke. The darkness seemed to evaporate, dissolving into the air like smoke, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. I could feel the weight lifting off my chest. The figure, the woman, they were gone, fading into nothingness. I lay there, in the cold cemetery, heart still racing, my mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. The town of Roswell was still there, but it was different now. The grip had loosened. The shadows that had lingered for so long were finally gone. I don't know how I survived. I don't know if anyone else has or if they ever will. But I do know one thing for sure. Roswell has secrets, dark, terrible secrets, and it will always try to claim its own. But I'm still here, and I'm not going to let it take me. The night after it all ended felt too quiet, almost too peaceful. It was as if the town of Roswell, once a place haunted by something far beyond our understanding, had settled back into its eerie silence. But I knew better now. I knew that the battle I had fought wasn't over. It had only just shifted. I had broken the curse, or at least I thought I had. I made my way back to my house, the streets empty and cold, the buildings around me barely visible in the moonlight. The fear that had been gnawing at me for days, weeks, had faded a little, but deep down I could still feel it. Something was watching, waiting. The town might be quiet, but it wasn't done with me. I tried to tell myself that I was free, that whatever force had controlled Roswell had been defeated. But every step I took in the direction of my house felt wrong, as though the very ground was shifting beneath my feet, like it was pulling me back in. My hand tightened around the pocket watch my grandfather had passed down to me, the one thing that had helped me fight back. As I reached the front door, I paused. The familiar creaking of the house, the warm glow from the old lamp inside, should have felt comforting. But instead, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. There was a shadow in the window, just a faint outline, but I could see it. Someone or something standing there watching. I'd been alone since the night I fled. I had made sure of it. There was no one else. I stepped back, my heart in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to run again. But I couldn't let it win. I turned the doorknob and stepped inside. The house was dark, eerily so. The air felt thick, stagnant, and I could hear the faintest creak from the floorboards above me. Slowly, I moved through the hallway, the floor squeaking under my weight, and my eyes scanned the dark corners of the house. Then I saw it. On the dining table, a letter. It was old, the paper yellowed and brittle, with my name written across the front in uneven, spidery handwriting. I opened it slowly, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. The letter was simple. There was no date, no signature. Just these words: you can never truly leave. Roswell is yours, just as you are ours. The town calls you back. You've only just begun to serve. The price of escape has yet to be paid. The words sent a cold wave through me. The chill of the room deepened, and I turned around, my pulse spiking. The shadow in the window was no longer there, but I could feel its presence, inside the house now. I took a step back, and then another. The front door slammed shut behind me. Suddenly, the house was filled with that low hum again, the same one I had heard by the cemetery. It was all around me now, vibrating through the walls, through the very air itself. I reached for the flashlight again, but it flickered, and the lights overhead went out. I was trapped. The air was thick, suffocating, and I felt it. Something moving in the dark. It was closing in on me. The shadows twisted and contorted, forming shapes that didn't make sense, figures that seemed to grow from the darkness itself. I ran to the stairs, my feet stumbling, but the moment I took the first step, I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Jake, you can't run from us." I turned to face the stairs, and that's when I saw it. The figure again. The same one from the cemetery, from the diner. It was standing at the top of the stairs, its hollow eyes staring down at me, its mouth stretched into that terrible, sickening smile. I couldn't escape. The house was alive. The town was alive. Roswell had always been waiting for me. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about escape anymore. Maybe it was about survival. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.